Most people discover the Peter Principle long before they ever hear the name. They discover it at work, quietly. A manager who used to be brilliant suddenly becomes slow, political, impossible to communicate with. A creator who built an audience alone suddenly builds a company and loses everything that made their work interesting. A great engineer becomes a terrible executive. A teacher who understood students perfectly becomes an administrator buried under meetings, spreadsheets, and policies nobody believes in. At first, these feel like isolated failures. Different people, different industries, different personalities. But after a while, the pattern becomes difficult to ignore. The people who rise inside systems often become less effective the higher they go. Not because they stopped trying, not because they became lazy, but because the game changed underneath them, and the skills that created success at one level suddenly become liabilities at the next. This is where things start to feel strange. Because modern systems don't just allow this to happen, they seem to produce it naturally. If you have ever worked inside a large company, you have probably felt this tension already. The people making decisions often seem disconnected from the actual work. Meetings multiply. Communication becomes slower. Obvious problems survive for months because nobody wants responsibility attached to them. And meanwhile, the people who are actually competent become increasingly exhausted. They stop caring, or they leave. But the strange part is this. Most of these systems were not built by incompetent people, at least not originally. Many were built by highly capable individuals, which creates an uncomfortable question. How does competence slowly transform into bureaucracy? How do organizations designed for efficiency gradually become machines that resist reality itself? Most people blame corruption, or greed, or stupidity. Sometimes that is true, but often something deeper is happening, something structural. The system rewards people for succeeding in their current role. Then it moves them into a completely different role. And over time, the entire hierarchy begins drifting upward toward incompetence. This idea became known as the Peter Principle, but the mechanism underneath it is simpler than it sounds. In a hierarchy, people are promoted based on how well they perform in their current position, not based on whether they are suited for the next one. A salesperson who consistently closes deals gets promoted into management. A programmer who writes excellent code gets promoted into leadership. A creator who makes great videos becomes responsible for hiring, operations, branding, and finance. At first, this seems logical. Reward success, promote talent, scale competence upward. But something subtle changes during the transition. The next role is often a completely different game. A great salesperson succeeds through speed, competitiveness, and persuasion. A manager succeeds through coaching, patience, emotional stability, and systems thinking. Those are not the same skills. In fact, they can conflict with each other. The traits that made someone exceptional in one environment may become destructive in another. This is where the system quietly turns against itself. Success at one layer becomes the reason for failure in the next. You can see this pattern almost everywhere once you recognize it. One of the most famous fictional examples is Michael Scott from The Office. As a salesman, he was highly effective. He understood people. He generated results. But as a manager, everything became unstable. Meetings became chaos. Decisions became emotional. Productivity collapsed around him. The joke worked because it felt familiar. Almost everyone has met someone like that. But the same pattern exists outside comedy too. Early in Apple's history, Steve Jobs was considered extremely difficult to work with, visionary, brilliant, but often chaotic as a manager. The skills required to imagine revolutionary products were not the same skills required to run a stable organization at scale, and this is the part most people miss. The Peter Principle is not really about bad individuals. It is about mismatched environments. Every promotion is a transition into a different game with different incentives, different pressures, and different forms of competence. Some people adapt, many do not. And systems rarely know the difference beforehand. At first, this problem looks small. One bad manager, one weak executive, one dysfunctional department. But hierarchies compound over time. Every layer promotes people upward. Every layer filters competence differently. And slowly, the organization begins filling with individuals operating at the edge of their capability. not because the system failed, but because the system followed its own logic perfectly. Reward performance, promote upward, repeat. The higher someone climbs, the more abstract their work becomes. They move further away from reality and closer to coordination, politics, forecasting, and image management. The skills become less concrete, the feedback becomes slower, and incompetence becomes harder to measure. A bad engineer is easy to detect because the code breaks. A bad executive can survive for years behind presentations, meetings, and strategic language. This is where large systems begin separating from reality itself. The people at the top often no longer understand the conditions at the bottom, but the system keeps rewarding movement upward anyway, because upward movement is what the system was designed to optimize for. This is why large organizations often start behaving irrationally, even when the people inside them are intelligent. The problem is not usually a lack of intelligence. It is accumulated distance from reality. A company begins by solving a real problem. Small team, clear feedback, fast decisions. Then it grows. More managers appear, more layers, more reporting structures. And gradually, survival inside the organization becomes different from creating value outside the organization. This is where incentives begin mutating. Employees stop optimizing for truth and start optimizing for safety. Managers stop rewarding accuracy and start rewarding predictability. Information moving upward becomes filtered because every layer has something to lose. At first, the distortion is small, then it compounds. Eventually, leadership no longer sees reality directly. They see edited versions of reality designed to survive internal politics. This is why large systems often react too slowly, even when the warning signs are obvious. The problem is not ignorance, it is structural insulation. The higher the hierarchy rises, the weaker its contact with reality becomes. Kodak is one of the clearest examples of this pattern. Ironically, Kodak engineers invented one of the first digital cameras. The threat was visible early. The technology already existed inside the company. But internally, the organization was optimized around film. Film generated profit. Film protected careers. Film supported the structure that already existed. So the system resisted the very future it had discovered itself. At first, this looked rational. Protect the profitable business. Avoid unnecessary disruption. But something underneath was breaking. The more successful Kodak became, the harder it became for the company to change direction. Success created structural rigidity. And eventually, the organization became trapped inside incentives designed for a world that no longer existed. This pattern repeats constantly. Nokia struggled with similar problems. Internally, many employees understood that the smartphone market was shifting rapidly. But middle management became increasingly afraid of communicating negative information upward. Nobody wanted to become associated with bad news. So the system slowly disconnected leadership from reality. Not because employees were stupid, but because the incentive structure punished honesty. Most people who work inside corporate environments eventually feel this tension personally. Endless meetings that solve nothing. Metrics replacing actual outcomes. Managers protecting processes nobody believes in. Decisions delayed because every layer introduces another approval cycle. At first, these systems are introduced to improve coordination. Then they expand. Then they become self-sustaining. The organization begins optimizing for internal stability instead of external effectiveness. And this creates a strange psychological effect on competent people. The people who actually solve problems often become the most frustrated individuals inside the system, because they can still see reality clearly. They notice inefficiency faster. They feel friction earlier. Meanwhile, the people best adapted to hierarchy are often the people most comfortable navigating ambiguity, politics, and appearances, not necessarily the people producing the best outcomes. This is where many ambitious people begin feeling trapped. They are told that success means climbing upward, but the higher they climb, the less connected they feel to meaningful work. The promotion looks like progress from the outside. Inside, it often feels like slow detachment. And this is the hidden psychological cost of the Peter Principle. Most discussions focus on organizational inefficiency, but the deeper damage happens internally. A person spends years mastering a craft, writing code, designing products, teaching students, making videos, solving technical problems. Then eventually, success pulls them away from the thing they were actually good at. They become responsible for coordination instead of creation, management instead of mastery, visibility instead of substance. At first, this feels like growth, higher salary, higher status, more authority. But something subtle disappears during the transition. The direct relationship between effort and meaning becomes weaker. Many people are not burned out because they work too hard. They are burned out because they are trapped inside roles, disconnected from their natural strengths. Modern systems rarely distinguish between competence and promotability. The person best at doing the work is often pushed towards supervising the work instead. And over time, entire industries become filled with people managing processes they no longer emotionally connect with. This becomes even more dangerous in modern digital culture because the internet accelerates promotion faster than any hierarchy in history. In older systems, promotion happened gradually, years inside companies, slow increases in responsibility. Today, attention itself acts like promotion. A creator makes a few successful videos and suddenly becomes a business owner, employer, strategist, public figure, and operator simultaneously. A Twitter account gains influence, and suddenly people assume expertise exists underneath visibility. At first, this seems efficient. The internet rewards talent quickly. But once again, the game changes faster than people can adapt. The skills required to gain attention are not the same skills required to sustain organizations, lead teams, or make long-term decisions. And because modern platforms reward visibility so aggressively, competence itself becomes harder to evaluate. Attention starts replacing credibility. Popularity starts replacing understanding. This is where the Peter Principle mutates into something larger than corporate hierarchy. Entire online ecosystems begin promoting people into positions they were never prepared to handle. Not because the internet is broken, but because modern systems increasingly confuse exposure with capability. At first, the solution seems obvious. Just promote people more carefully, train managers better, build healthier organizations, and those things do matter. But they do not remove the deeper tension underneath the system, because the Peter Principle is not simply a hiring mistake. It emerges naturally whenever status moves upward faster than skill adaptation. Every new layer introduces a different environment with different pressures, different incentives, and different definitions of success. This is why some people become trapped even inside careers they once loved. The programmer who loved building things now spends all day in meetings. The teacher who loved teaching now manages budgets and policies. The creator who loved making videos now spends more time negotiating sponsorships than creating. From the outside, these transitions look successful. Higher income, higher status, larger influence, but internally, something often starts collapsing. The person becomes increasingly disconnected from the work that originally gave them energy. Modern systems call this growth, but growth and alignment are not always the same thing. Sometimes, advancement quietly pulls people away from the environment where they were most competent in the first place. This is why many ambitious people feel strangely lost after achieving the thing they originally wanted. They thought success would create freedom. Instead, it often creates maintenance, more people to manage, more expectations, more abstraction. The more responsibility increases, the more direct feedback disappears. And without direct feedback, competence becomes harder to sustain. This is where many systems begin optimizing for appearance rather than reality. A manager learns how to sound strategic instead of making clear decisions. A company learns how to present growth instead of creating value. A creator learns how to maximize engagement instead of saying something meaningful. At first, these shifts seem harmless, small compromises, minor adjustments to survive larger systems. Then the incentives deepen. The metrics become the objective itself. Visibility becomes more important than substance. And slowly, people begin serving the system instead of the original purpose that system was built for. This is why modern life often feels psychologically fragmented. Many people are no longer optimizing for what they actually value. They are optimizing for what the structure rewards. And this is where the Peter Principle connects to something much larger than management theory. It becomes a way of understanding modern society itself. Most large systems do not intentionally create incompetence. They simply reward the behaviors easiest to measure. Corporations reward promotability. Social media rewards visibility. Schools reward compliance and performance metrics. Platforms reward engagement. Political systems reward persuasion more than understanding. At first, these measurements help systems scale. Then they slowly replace reality. The map becomes more important than the territory. This is why so many people today feel trapped inside invisible games they never consciously agreed to play. They keep optimizing, keep performing, keep climbing. But the higher they go, the more disconnected they feel from meaning, clarity, and direct contact with reality. Not because they failed, but because the incentives themselves change their behavior over time. The system did not need to force them. It only needed to reward certain patterns consistently enough. Eventually, people begin adapting automatically. The uncomfortable part is that highly intelligent people are often the most vulnerable to this process. Because intelligent people are usually better at adapting to systems. They learn the rules quickly. They optimize efficiently. They understand what behaviors create rewards. But this creates another trap. The better someone becomes at navigating a system, the easier it becomes to lose sight of why the system existed in the first place. This is why entire industries sometimes continue moving in obviously destructive directions while filled with smart individuals. Finance, media, tech, corporate culture. The problem is rarely individual stupidity. It is collective optimization without reflection. Everyone follows incentives that make sense locally, while the larger structure slowly disconnects from reality globally. At first, the system still functions. Then friction increases, trust declines, burnout spreads, meaning disappears. This is where many people begin feeling something difficult to explain. They are succeeding according to the rules around them. But internally, the success feels strangely empty, because humans are not designed to optimize endlessly for abstract systems. Eventually, psychological exhaustion appears, where meaning used to be. So, the real lesson of the Peter Principle is probably not never seek promotion. The deeper lesson is understanding that every level is a different game, and every system quietly shapes the people inside it. Before chasing the next layer upward, it becomes important to ask a different question. Not is this higher, but what does this environment reward? Because every structure carries psychological consequences hidden inside its incentives. Some environments reward clarity, others reward politics, some reward craftsmanship, others reward visibility. Some reward truth, others reward survival inside the hierarchy itself. The danger is not ambition. The danger is climbing so far into a system that you no longer recognize your own behavior inside it. This is why preserving contact with reality matters so much. Direct feedback, real skills, real people, real outcomes. Without those anchors, it becomes easy for competence to slowly dissolve into performance. And once systems begin rewarding performance over reality, decline often becomes invisible until it is already everywhere. Most people think systems become inefficient because bad people eventually take control. But many systems decay naturally, even when the individuals inside them are trying their best. Competence does not automatically transfer upward. Incentives distort behavior over time. Visibility replaces understanding. And eventually, large structures begin optimizing for their own continuation instead of their original purpose. This is why modern life can feel strangely disconnected even during periods of apparent progress. The systems around us continue scaling. More data, more optimization, more productivity. But underneath the surface, many people feel increasingly detached from meaning, craftsmanship, and direct human reality. The problem is not simply incompetence, it is structural drift. A slow movement away from the environments where people once understood what they were actually doing. The Peter Principle is not just about bad managers. It is about what happens when systems reward upward movement more consistently than genuine alignment. And once you notice that pattern, you start seeing it almost everywhere.